Now, I've been talking to my born-again friend, Brian. I've been talking to him again. I mentioned Brian in a sermon that I did. About called What's in a Name earlier this year. Brian and I have been friends for a long time. Earlier, a couple weeks ago, we had a talk in his office, which ended sort of unsatisfactorily when he had to go deal with a customer, and I left. And then the next day, the following text exchange, which Matt and I are going to act out, occurred. I've slightly edited this because it was really long. I hope you don't find it too long and boring. Matt will be Brian, and I will be me.
Forgive me if this is a little long, but I've been thinking a lot about what we were talking about yesterday. The idea that it's about our good name makes it all about what we ourselves can do. Aside from it being a very Western, self-determined type of thinking, it completely eliminates the need for grace, which I believe is one of the most beautiful and fundamental tenets and differences of the Christian faith. No matter how good we try to be ourselves, there is always some little bit of evil lurking in there, be it greed, lust, ego. There's always something. My thought is that the good that I do is born out of what was first done for me, that salvation that you reject. I believe we all need it, and it's a free gift called grace. As much as the Christian faith is screwed up, it is probably the thing I love the most. I could reject it too, but I choose not to. Thanks for being my friend. I love talking to you. See you soon.
Grace. Hi, Brian. I was thinking about what we were talking about too, but I had to look up grace. Here's what it said. In Christian terms, grace can be defined as God's favor toward the unworthy or God's benevolence on the undeserving. In His grace, God is willing to forgive us and bless us, even though we fall short of living righteously. This came from Christianity.com. I wanted to look it up because I was honestly not sure of the meaning, and maybe this isn't even your concept. Anyway, this sort of gets to what I was left troubled with in our unfinished conversation yesterday. You said something about feeling unworthy of your place in life, and I made some glib comment about not feeling unworthy or guilty about my life, even though I know I was born with a lot of advantages and other people weren't. I said that I had been listening to a podcast that said a lot of 18 to 34-year-olds in the world look at things through the lens of oppressors versus oppressed, and though I think that's a great paradigm and certainly something that exists, it's just a narrow way to see the whole scope of the world. You made a comment that there were certainly a lot of people in the world who were simply not able to compete and succeed. And then someone came in and the conversation ended. You had to go take care of a customer, and we left with me sounding way more mercenary than I think I am. I guess I don't think I have advantages because of God's grace, though I guess I can live with this metaphor. I'm far from thinking that everything I have is because I worked really hard, like Ayn Rand or something. I'm thankful for what I have been given, and I'm far from a survival of the fittest capitalist. I'm just not sure that a world like what I want can exist. As our conversation ended yesterday, I was beginning to think that the flaws in human nature, maybe what you call evil, mitigate against us being able to survive ourselves. Maybe this is why people need structure and dogma, religion. Maybe I'm the kind of person who is screwing things up by not seeing that. Maybe I'm simply being too much the libertarian I hate because his concept of freedom seems to disregard basic human rights of others. Maybe if we were all true Christians or conformed to Talmudic teachings or whatever, the world would be better. I guess I'm willing to think that might be true. I just don't think it's humanly possible.
Well, isn't that the point? It's not humanly possible. But with God, all things are possible, to use the oft-quoted verse. But I agree with the comments on capitalism. We should be sustainable and honoring to both the planet and the people. Unfortunately, people that care not one bit about the planet or people, possibly even their good name, control way too much. Too many have zero moral compass, religious or otherwise. They control too much. That's part of what makes the humanly possible difficult.
Huh. But didn't your God give us free will? My friend Jay Harvey says he did. I know this is the oldest question humans have asked, but why is the world so messed up if with God all things are possible?
Yes, God gave us all free will. How hollow would your love for Carla be if you made her love you? God wants our love, but won't force it on us. As such, with the very first human, sin entered. There was a consequence. Now we need grace. Most of the people in the world aren't Christians, and even a lot of the people who are part of the problem. Unfortunately, we now live in a world of tribalism where we shout with even louder words that our side is right. If you're not with us, you're against us. The louder we shout, the less we listen. As much as I believe that nothing is irredeemable, I believe we are generations away from ending with reconciliation, or a meteor, or a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, I got my doubts about a meteor or a nuclear bomb being our end, though in the stress of climate change, which will burn us up or drown us in the water of melting ice caps, I suppose in that stress, the nuclear button might get pushed.
Okay, so let me share a bit of Psalm 130. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More even than watchmen waiting for the morning. Stupid thing is, I know what I'm waiting for, and I know it all's within me. Let me take you back a year or so ago. I became aware of the idea that there was much more meaning to life and faith than I've been allowing myself to experience, or was even aware of for that matter. For most of the last year, I've been on a journey within. I began a ritual where, I get up very early, I go down into the basement. My journey down to the basement has become a metaphor for the journey down into my soul. As I've been waiting to hear from the Lord to reveal the unknown object of my search, it becomes painfully obvious that it's a simple four-letter word: love. So often we get caught up in the watching and the waiting and the searching, looking everywhere but the most obvious place. Like a misplaced pair of glasses that are on top of my head. Love is already in us. I know at the end of the search is love. Love for myself, love for others, a different and better way of viewing life. More acceptance, less judging, more peace.
My friend, you write very nicely. But someday, we need to have another talk about the word faith. Also, you said love is already in us. As a humanist, and I guess I'm a humanist, I agree with that. I think you and I are pretty much the same. I could write what you wrote. I would simply write it without God in it. I might substitute reason for faith, maybe. The path might be different, but I think we're sort of on a journey to the same place.
Okay. I think you're mostly right in your direction together, except the faith component. It's kind of foundational to me.
You know, dude, that's why we should have lunch and talk sometime. I've evolved. I used to hate the word faith. I've evolved. I think I might just not know what it means, at least to me. Does faith have to be in God? I was raised by scientists. I have to write a sermon for Sunday, December 31st. I'm trying to plant a seed in my very inadequate brain. Maybe this is part of it.
There we go. Okay, we all have faith in things. There isn't only one kind of thing to have faith in. But in addition to the other things I have faith in, nothing is greater than my faith in God. The thing I have never understood about scientists is that they rule out the existence of God when they're taught that they shouldn't rule anything out without evidence. Proving God is kind of like trying to prove love. You can't identify it specifically, but you know it when it's there.
Well, I like it, though. I think where most scientists are going is that they can indeed prove that God did not, for instance, do all of the things that Genesis said he did in those first days. They have much better and more provable explanations. Since nobody can actually prove that God did, anything, I guess some scientists, not all, conclude that God does not exist.
But you can no more prove there's a God than I can prove there is. We both try to live honoring lives, but if neither outcome is knowable, then we should choose the one that has the best outcome. Even if there's only a 1% chance that I'm right, and we end up in two very different outcomes. I'm in heaven with God, and you're out of relationship with God in hell. If you're right, we both end up good people. We're now just worm food.
So this is your typical, I've never been to anything really regularly, but a UU church, even just a Unitarian church before they merged, so I don't know if other churches do this or not. But this is the typical service about a New Year's resolution, or at least an aspiration. So I went to the dictionary, online, of course. A resolution is a firm decision to do or not do something. An aspiration is a hope or ambition of achieving something. This sermon will basically be about, an aspiration, about me trying to think about shutting up a bit more, maybe not trying to have the last word in every conversation. A lot of y'all know me pretty well. It's something I certainly need to think about. But it seems to me that we all might, I mean, not anybody here specifically, maybe nobody, maybe some of us need to speak up and speak our minds even more. But I think this fractured world we are in might benefit from a little less need to opine. And before I get back to this and to the strange dialogue Matt and I acted out, I want to note a couple of weird things that happened while I was writing this sermon. First, several people have brought it to my attention that preaching about shutting up is sort of a contradiction, maybe even hypocritical, but I want to remind you guys that the new year has not really started yet. Secondly, and much more weirdly, you know how sometimes when you're in your house and talking about something like, I don't know, maybe ordering a new blind for the window or something like that, and you sit down at your computer or your phone and your whole social media feed, your email is full of ads for window blinds. I used to not believe in that. I thought it was a conspiracy theory, but it seems to be more and more true. Well, the beginning of last week, I was talking on the phone to somebody about this service about shutting up. And about 5 minutes later, I sat down and picked up my phone and looked at my Facebook feed, and a meme showed up on my Facebook feed with a quote from the Christian Bible, specifically Paul's admonishment to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 13. The first line is, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal." There, just 5 minutes after my phone conversation, Paul was basically telling me to shut up. Pretty weird, huh? A bit more about 1 Corinthians 13 later on. Now back to the whole shutting up thing. I've said many times in my life, in many situations, and to many people, that in my family, arguing was a good thing. It was a valued skill. Well, maybe not always to my mom, in whose family arguing was something sometimes scary and maybe even violent. But I've justified arguing for my whole life by telling people I was brought up arguing, and that arguing doesn't have to be viewed as a bad thing. In my family, we argued for sport. We argued to prove our worthiness. Maybe my mom's sometime expressed distaste for the sport and her reasons should have clued me in that it's a justification our whole family does, wasn't really a justification at all, but it didn't clue me in. I was clueless. I had a discussion, sort of an argument with Reverend Dawn a few weeks ago. It was a worship associate thing. I used to have these arguments with Jamie all the time. Not all the time, but sometimes. In the end of my discussion with Dawn, I sort of apologized for the argument and gave my old standby justification that in my family, arguing was a good thing. And Reverend Dawn allowed that it had been that way in her family too, and said not to worry about it. It was okay with her. But somehow I didn't feel really great about it. This discussion with Reverend Dawn happened just before the text dialogue I had with my old friend Brian, the one that Matt and I read earlier. I hadn't meant to argue with Dawn that day, And I hadn't really thought out what I ended up saying. It just sort of came out. I felt bad about it. And in any argument, in any dialogue, even for sport, not being prepared is a way for things to go really badly. So in that text dialogue with my friend Brian, I was more prepared. We'd started the dialogue in his office the day before and had the rest of the day and that following evening to think about it before his text message greeted me in the morning. And honestly, this discussion between me and Brian has been going on for years. And I was just about to text him when he texted me. I think by now, after 25 years or so of friendship and more than 10 years of being brave enough to have this religious dialogue between me and Brian, we both know that we aren't going to convert each other. I know I've learned and probably changed some from our discussions, and I think Brian has learned and maybe come around a bit too. You may have noticed that at the end of the dialogue Matt and I did, I did an overly dramatic pause. I didn't respond to Brian. I was a good boy. I shut up. Maybe I was thinking about my dialogue with Dawn that happened a couple days earlier. Maybe I was thinking about the whole thing about argument for sport, which has sort of been my life. Maybe I was thinking about my pre-pandemic decision to quit making political statements on social media, which honestly has resulted in a much calmer life for me. Maybe I was thinking about something I learned early on in my business career. Well, not really early on in my business career, because early in my business career we didn't have email, and this was, I'm old. And this has to do with email, but somewhere near the beginning of email, I learned not to answer an email in anger, not to answer an email that made me angry, especially late at night when I was sleepy or early the next morning after 3 cups of coffee and I'm all going. In fact, my policy became never to answer an email that made me mad until I had time to calm down and reflect on how I might answer it productively, or even decide whether it would be productive to answer at all, to just shut up. Anyway, after Brian's last statement, here it is. Even if there is only 1% chance that I'm right and a 99% chance that you're right, if I'm right, we end up in 2 very different outcomes, the whole heaven and hell thing. And if you're right, we both end up good people who are now just worm food. I had a lot to say. That was part of the drama of the end of that little play. You could tell that a lot was going on in my pea-like brain. I agonized, but in the end, I decided that most of what I wanted to say might have gone over the edge into what Brian would think was hurtful. I do love Brian, and I know that people on his side think that people on my side belittle his faith, and I don't want him to think I'm doing that. Most of what I'd have said would not have been productive. It would not really have come from love. Now, maybe this brings me to a part of Paul's message to us, to the Corinthians, that I have a hard time with. This is the part which says, "When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me." I sort of get this. I guess I had to mature a little bit to the point of not answering stupid business emails in anger. I had to grow up. I get it. But I think that though children, by and large, are prone to being too impulsive, they are, by and large, much better at expressing love, and they express love much more easily than we do. As we humans grow up, put the ways of childhood behind us, we hopefully become a little less impulsive, but also we become less easy with our love. All of us get burned by love along the way. I guess it's only natural. However, I think it's strange that Paul exhorts us, or the Corinthians, whoever he's exhorting, to only speak when we speak with love, but at the same time, he exhorts us to grow up and disregard our childlike selves, disregard the easy love of our childlike selves. I had a discussion about Paul and his writings with a friend and fellow UUI member who came from Catholicism. Remember, this is all cultural appropriation for me. I did not grow up in anything kind of church, and the only church I've ever been to is a UU church. So I don't understand, and I wanted to understand. And I'm not going to say who this person was. We have a lot of people who came from the Catholic faith here, so it could have been anybody. But this person, this friend of mine, expressed a dislike for Paul, and in fact indicated that Paul's writings may have started his journey out of Catholicism. He said, and I'm only paraphrasing here, that Paul changed his tune a lot, and that he was all about the sort of ends justify the means Christianity that this friend had come to dislike. I don't know. Paul wrote, depending on who you talk to, about half of the Christian Bible. So he had a lot to say. I don't know. I'm a 70-year-old man who can value both growing out of being totally impulsive, but who also wants to connect more with the loving child within me.